Sanhedrin Daf Tes Amud Beis at the bottom and Daf Yud Amud Aleph, the immorality of plea bargains, Adam Karav עצmo, by understanding one word in Rashi. We were talking about Rishonim and how what we learned from them yesterday and in previous days. Today, just from one word in Rashi, we're going to understand the essence of what family means, what it means to be family, and why not only don't we encourage family members to snitch on one another, but we don't accept any evidence that they give on one another. It's not accepted in Torah law. And we'll get into this fairly deeply in the time that we have. To do this, we need to understand four principles in Hilchos Eidus, in laws of evidence, and they're principles that will be woven in and out of this Masechta and the next Masechta. The first one is Adam Karov עצmo, that you are your own relative. Whatever prohibitions or whatever guidelines apply to giving evidence about your relative certainly apply to giving evidence about yourself. Number two, Ein Adam Bisim Atzmo Rasha. A person is not believed to make himself a criminal. In matters of money, you can say, I owe so-and-so a certain amount of money, even though there are no witnesses, and even though that person isn't claiming the money from you. From that moment onwards, the debt is established just on the words of your own confession, your own admission, but you can't confess to a crime. Third one is Palgin and Dibure. We have a principle here of Palgin and Dibure, a difficult principle that we have in Hilchos Eidus, which there is that there are times where we take a witness's evidence and we split it into two, and we say this piece we accept and that piece we don't accept. Under what circumstances? Where does that apply? Where doesn't it apply? We'll have a look at. And Eidut shebetela miktzata betela kula. And the principle that if there's part of evidence is rejected because it's inadmissible, then you reject all the evidence. And you can see already there's a potential conflict between the third and the fourth one. If there's a principle and the Rivot, we'll talk about that today. If there's a principle that if part of the evidence is rejected, you reject the full evidence, how can you say Palkin and Dibure? How can you say we accept this piece and we don't accept that piece? The Gemara that we're dealing with here is a machlokes Rav Yosef and Rove, in a case where a man says, Ploni reva'o le'onso. So we're dealing here with an act of actual homosexuality, physical intimacy that breaks the laws of male homosexuality, which is an isur d'oraisa. I'm not going into the whole issue of homosexuality at the moment, but it's a capital offense in this situation. And a man says, Reuven had homosexual relations with me, but I was raped. I didn't participate in it. Well, now we have one witness against the rapist. So if we can get a second man to support that and say, I actually saw it happen, then the two of them can become witnesses against the rapist. Lirtzono, if he says, I wasn't raped, I was a willing partner to it. Rashahu, then he is making himself wicked. He's saying, I was over, I did an isur of the Torah. He's making himself wicked, and therefore we can't accept his evidence, not only about himself, but we can't accept his evidence about the rapist either. That's what Rav Yosef says. Torah amra, al tashet rasha eid. Rava amar, Adam karov etzel atzmo, ve'en Adam misim atzmo rasha. A person is his own relative, and he can't make himself a wicked person. So we ignore what he said about himself, and we accept what he said about the rapist. That's how the Gemara wants to learn. That's how Rove learns it. Then the Gemara goes on Daf Yud with a second case, which we won't be dealing with much today, I don't think. Ploni ba alishti. What happens if a man says, so-and-so had relations with my wife? Hu ve'echad mitztarfin lohorgo. That's also a capital offense. So you get one other witness, and the two of them can give evidence against the seducer, and he can be given capital punishment, aval lo lahorga, but she can't be given punishment because he's related to her and his evidence isn't admitted to her, and so on. The Rivot asks the question. The Rivot is in his Tshuvas, and it's quoted in the Rosh in Makos. We'll come to it in the next Masechta. And the Ran here also quotes this Rivot. Shekol eidut shebetela miktzata machmat psul kurva betela kula. If you say, I can't accept this part of your evidence because you're a relative, the entire evidence becomes inadmissible. That's the principle, or that's the fourth principle. So how can you say here, we will accept your evidence about the rapist, but we won't accept the evidence about yourself. Because if we accept the evidence about yourself, then you're a Rasha. If you're a Rasha, we can't even accept your evidence about the rapist. So we'll cut the evidence in two. We'll accept the one piece, we won't accept the other piece. Says the Rivot, how can that work? Lo pagin and dibure. So the Rivot goes on to an answer, which I bring on the second page, and Reb Shimon Shkop, without actually quoting the Rivot strangely, at least in the part of Reb Shimon that I was able to learn, expands that further, where the Rivot says this principle of ein adam mesim עצמו rasha, that you can't make yourself a criminal. That's not a law of evidence. It doesn't mean that the evidence is not accepted. In the case of kurva, we say the evidence is not accepted. I'm giving evidence that my brother is a criminal, so we don't accept it. It's evidence, but it's pasul. It's unacceptable evidence. But if I say I am a criminal, that's nonsense. It's just absurd. We don't even hear it. It doesn't exist. It isn't evidence at all. So it's not palgin and dibura in the sense of we have a piece of evidence, this piece we take and that piece we don't. The Rivot learns we have two statements. One is evidence and one is nonsense. So we take away the nonsense and we keep the evidence. That's basically how the Rivot learns it. But Rashi clearly is learning it differently. Let's look at Rashi carefully. Says Rashi, Rava Amar, Ein Adam nifsal le'idut behodat piv, da Adam karov etzel עצמו. A person can't be made a criminal and therefore pasul, disqualify him for other evidence. Why? The Adam Karov etzel עצמו, because a person is a relative of himself. So his evidence about himself is not accepted. Hilkach, that's the important word in Rashi. And that is why Ein Adam Yachol Lasum עצמו Rasha. Rashi gives us a huge chidush here. Rashi says the idea that one cannot make oneself a criminal is a branch of the law that Adam Karov etzel עצמו. The reason you can't make yourself a criminal is because you are related to yourself. According to the Rivot, they're two completely different principles. The psul, the disqualification of relationship, is a disqualification of evidence. It is evidence, it just can't be used. In Adam mesim עצמו rasha, you can't criminalize yourself. That's, if you do so, we disregard the words altogether. It's not evidence at all. That's how the Rivot learns. Rashi is not saying that. Rashi is saying there's only one principle, and that is relative. You can't give evidence against a relative. You're your biggest relative. So of course you can't give evidence against yourself. That's how Rashi learns it. So that means, according to Rashi, klomar, al idut עצמו אינו נעשה rasha. On the evidence he gave against himself, he's not a rasha. Sharei Torah pesala karov leidut, because he's a karov, he's a relative of himself. So that's inadmissible evidence. But ne'erag harovea, but we do accept evidence against the rapist. Depalginan dibura o mehemnen le'gabi chavre, because we split his statement. The one piece we don't accept because he's a relative, but we accept the piece against the other one because he's not a relative. Tosfos expands it a little bit and says, Lo palginan dibura b'chad gufa. We never split evidence when the object of the evidence is one person. You can't give evidence about an individual and we'll say, well, this piece of the evidence we'll accept, that piece of the evidence we won't accept. It's one piece of integrated evidence. But if the evidence is about two different people, you can say we accept the evidence on this person and not on that person. So Tosfos is expanding Rashi and explaining what Rashi is saying. The principle here is kurva. The principle here is you're a relative. Now you're giving evidence about two people. You're saying, so-and-so, this man had intimate relationships with me, homosexual relationships. So who am I giving evidence against? That man. Then I'm saying, and I was a willing partner. Who am I giving evidence against? Myself. That part we can take out because you're a karov. So that's how Rashi deals with the objection of the Rivot. The Rivot doesn't deal with it that way because the Rivot holds you can't take a statement and split it. If you're disqualifying part of a statement, you can't split it unless you say that part of the statement isn't evidence at all. But if it is evidence, it's just about two people, says the Rivot. I don't care if it's about one people, or person, or two person. The problem's with the subject, not the objects. You can't take the subject of evidence, the witness, and split his evidence into two. But you can, if part of it isn't even evidence at all, you take the piece which is evidence. That's how the Rivot learns. Rashi says no. Rashi learns there's only one principle here, and that's the principle of the disqualification of kuruva, of relationship. And because, and here this man is giving two sets of evidence. He's giving evidence against the perpetrator, and he's giving evidence against himself. The evidence against himself we take off the table because he's a karov, and we're left with the evidence against the perpetrator. It's a separate piece of evidence. That's how Rashi would learn it. What emerges from this Rashi is that the whole principle of ein adam misim atzmo rasha, that whole idea that you can't make yourself a criminal, is not a separate idea. It's founded in the prohibition of family. So why is that so serious? Why can't you be accepted to give evidence against a member of family? Why is that so serious? A person's father or brother is a mafia member, and he's killed people, he's murdered, he's done all sorts of terrible things. And the only evidence we've got is from his own son or brother. We won't accept the evidence. And the reason, I believe, is because there is a conflict in values between justice. In this case, it often happens, values conflict with each other. We've spoken about that before. And part of one's worldview and one's philosophy is how you manage the values when they conflict with each other. And we've given various different examples we've had where truth and kindness can conflict with each other. And one person says, I won't compromise truth. If I have to be unkind, so be it. And another person says, I will never be unkind. If I have to sugarcoat the truth, I'll sugarcoat the truth, but I'll never be unkind to somebody. Those are two human beings who both believe in the same values, but they manage the conflict differently. There are times when values of the Torah conflict, and the Torah tells us how to manage them. There is a value of justice. There's a man who's a member of the mafia, and the only evidence we have against him is from members of his own family. If we can nail him, we've got him, and we put an end to it. But we've got to use members of his family. There's justice, there's honesty. Let's use the members of the family. They know the facts. On the other hand, we have a value of family. What are we saying about family if we're encouraging people to snitch on each other? What does that do to the value of family? Because family means I've got your back. Family means I will never harm you. That's what family means. And if we're going to encourage people to snitch on one another within the family, you're undermining family. And how many people are there who are sitting in prison in the United States, for example, because family members snitch on them? Because the officers of the district attorneys and the attorney generals bring enormous pressure on family members to talk about their family members. Because the attorney generals and the district attorneys are lazy. They just don't want to go. They want to get convictions. And they don't want to put in the work that it takes to find objective witnesses. They would rather destroy families and pit one member of the family against another member of the family. And what about a plea bargain? How many people are sitting in prison because they were intimidated into plea bargains? If you'll say you're guilty, then you'll only get 10 years in prison instead of 20 years in prison. And then he says he's guilty and he gets 20 years in prison. The stories are repeated over and over again because the district attorneys are lazy to find real evidence. They'd rather get a plea bargain. It's quicker, it's cheaper, and they get another check on their name that they've been able to put somebody else in prison. And so the prisons are full. We don't accept plea bargains. We accept it in financial issues, but not in criminal issues. We will never ask a person to make himself a rasha. And if he volunteers to make himself a rasha, or he volunteers to make a member of his family a rasha, we won't accept it. Because the principle is adam karov עצמו. The whole principle is kuruva. That's why you can't criminalize yourself. Because we will never undermine the value of family, even to get to justice. That you get an idea of how important the Torah considers family. And that family means I've got your back. I will never snitch on you. I'll work it out with you. We'll have a conversation about it. I'll bring whatever pressure I can upon you, but I won't snitch on you. And of course, this is what makes the whole issue, and I want to be very clear about it, the whole issue of sexual abuse in religious families such a serious issue today, because it gets confused with this issue. Where you've got members of the family who won't snitch on each other. Adam Karav Etzel Atzmo, and the question of Kurva, and Edadam Mesim Atzmo Rasha, and children won't report parents, and brothers won't report parents or won't report siblings. And it's very difficult in the religious community to be able to get to the bottom of issues and cases of sexual abuse within religious families. But one has to know, when chas v'sholom, a person in a family abuses another member of the family, he has broken the family bond. Now the laws of family no longer apply. We're talking about the laws of family. A person does something wrong, and the police try and pressurize the family members to snitch. There, we don't do that. But if that which the person did wrong undermines the very fabric of what a family is, he's abused a member of his own family, there he's taken himself right out of the klal of family. He is no more family. And these principles won't apply. And therefore one has to separate that out completely from this discussion. But we get a sense from here of how seriously the Torah takes matters of family, and how important it is to be able to support family. And sometimes family means further than our own family. I remember many years ago when I was in the pearl business, they were trying to get to the bottom of issues in the jewelry business in South Africa it was, and the authorities or the police came to see me to check if I was doing anything wrong. And after they were satisfied, there was one little thing that I wasn't doing 100% right, and they said, look, don't do it that way, because you're going to get yourself in trouble. This is the way to do it. And then it's clear, kind of, we understand these things go on, and it's normal. But there's nothing serious, and they gave me a clean bill of health. Then they sat down with me over a cup of coffee, and they said, we know you're not going to talk about other Jews, but are there some Gentiles you can give us information about? And that, in a sense, was a Kiddush Hashem. Of course, I didn't. But that was, in a sense, was a Kiddush Hashem, because they knew that Jews won't snitch on each other. Because Jews are family. They're going to have to find other forms of evidence. They're going to have to work a little harder. But don't pit one Jew against another. That's not going to work, because we're family. And to understand, we're talking about Achdus now, right? We're talking about unity in the Jewish people. Unity means an understanding of family. That we have our immediate family where these laws apply. And the halakha is very clear how far that extends to what family. There's immediate family where laws of avilut apply, where laws of mourning apply. But there's also a sense of family that goes far beyond our immediate family, which includes our entire nation, whether we like one another, whether we agree with one another, whether we approve of one another, it doesn't matter. There's an Indian of family, and we have each other's back. We will take care of each other. As we've seen over the last year, we'll put aside our differences to fight for one another. We'll confront our enemies for one another. We'll risk our lives and give our lives for one another, because that's the nature of family. That's the nature of achva, of brotherhood, that defines the Jewish people.